Good morning. Our lesson this morning is called God's Promises from the book of Isaiah, the 7th chapter, verses 7 through 17. Isaiah is known as the book of the Messiah. Well, chapter 7 is a powerful message that challenges our faith. It asks the question, is our faith strong enough to see us through crisis? Are we secure in our faith? If not, perhaps we do not fully understand the word of the Lord or the confirming sign that He has given. The historical setting is critical to the account since the prophet supplies it and the oracle draws on its timing. With a close study of the events referred to may date the oracle in this chapter to 734 BC. Well, an oracle are communications from God. The term refers both to divine responses to a question asked of God and to pronouncements made by God without His being asked. In one sense, oracles were prophecies since they often referred to the future. But oracles sometimes dealt with decisions to be made in the present. The communication was from Yahweh, the God of Israel. In times of idol worship, Israelites did seek a word or pronouncement from false gods. Many of Israel's neighbors sought oracles from their gods. Oracles were common in that period. The Hebrew words translated oracle may also be translated as burden, saying, or word. The word here, I feel, can be translated burden. There are two kinds of oracles. One is decision oracles. The second kind is pronouncement oracles. Decision oracles came when people asked God a question or sought His counsel. Pronouncement oracles were God's words to a situation or a person, even though no word from God had been sought. Chapter 7 is a pronouncement oracle. Pronouncement oracles were given to produce an effect. People were to hear and to change their ways. God's expression of concern by pronouncing judgment was intended to remind Israel of her mission to share God with others. On the throne in Nineveh was Tiglath-Pileser III, a ruthless and a powerful king. Syria and ancient Aramea, with its main city in Damascus, and Ephraim, the northern Israelite state, with its main city, Samaria, united to form a coalition against the kingdom of Judah with its capital in Jerusalem. Ahaz, Uzziah's unbelieving grandson, was on the throne in Jerusalem. When he heard of this coalition that was made to replace him with Tabeel, he sought support from Tiglath-Pileser, Pul in the historical account, against them. The book of Kings says that Ahaz was the son of Pul, that is, a political dependent. The alliance and its costly tribute were foolish because the Assyrian king was going to destroy the northern coalition anyway. Isaiah came to warn Ahaz that only Yahweh could guarantee safety. The prophecy of this chapter is amazingly accurate. The sign that a boy was about to be born is a pivotal point. Before he would be old enough to tell right from wrong, that is, about 12 years old, the enemies would not only be defeated, but cease to exist. According to history, Shalmaneser V, the successor to Tiglath-Pileser, campaigned against the land and besieged Samaria. He died in the duration and was succeeded by Sargon II, who completed the destruction of the northern state in 722 or 721 BC. So the oracle in Isaiah 7 could be dated about 12 years before that destruction in 722 BC. Then in line with Isaiah 7:18, the Egyptians and the Assyrians filled the land in their war with each other. Devastation from this war severely tested the people, so that nothing grew in the fields, and the survivors had to rely on curds and honey. This led to and included the invasion of 701 BC under Sennacherib, the next Assyrian king, when Hezekiah was on the throne in Jerusalem and 200,000 people from Judah were carried off into captivity. The details of the Assyrian crisis are very accurately prophesied in these oracles. Isaiah's prophecies, as well as the images he uses, are very precise. The chapter can be divided into 3 sections. The first 9 verses record the words of encouragement offered by Isaiah. Verses 10 through 16 introduce and elaborate on the sign of Emmanuel. And verses 17 through 25 go on to predict the invasion of Assyria. God was able to prevent the northern coalition from invading if Ahaz would have only believed. And God was willing to give a sign to guarantee it. But since Ahaz did not believe, God announced that there would be a glorious future for the Davidic family, though the immediate generation would not share in it, and the present land would be devastated by the Assyrians and the Egyptians. When a northern alliance terrified King Ahaz and his people, the Lord promised deliverance if they would only believe. But when Ahaz failed to respond correctly, the Lord announced the sign of the birth of Emmanuel in the royal family to show that Judah would survive the invasion and to encourage the people for the greater invasion to come from Assyria. Remember that only God can provide security amidst the terrifying circumstances of life. The greatest crisis in life are terrifying people. In verses 1 and 2, the fear that the alliance in ancient Israel caused Ahaz is the main point. Verse 3 describes how Yahweh instructed Isaiah to take his son and to go meet the king at the end of the conduit in the upper pool, the place where the king would be preparing for the attack. The point is not simply the meeting to give the king the word from God, but to stress the situation by taking the son, Shear Jashub. Isaiah and his sons are called signs. So Shear Jashub means a remnant will return. The name confirmed that war was inevitable. Destruction would follow, but a remnant would return. The remnant was introduced in chapter 1 and confirmed as the holy seed in chapter 6. The point through the scriptures is that while the covenant promises are unconditional, individual participation in them is conditioned on faith and obedience. Without faith, there will be no participation in the remnant. Wow, that's a lot of history, isn't it? And those are some hard names to say, let me tell you. Well, the first section of the lesson is called God Intervenes. Verses 7 through 9, it says this: "This is what the Lord God says. It will not happen. It will not occur. The chief city of Aram is Damascus. The chief of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The chief city of Ephraim is Samaria, and the chief of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you do not stand firm in your faith, then you will not stand at all." Well, verses 4 through 8 record the details of the words of comfort. God clearly says that Ahaz and the people need not fear this invasion, for it shall not happen. In fact, he refers to these two kings as two smoldering stumps of firebrands, meaning they will smolder out. Another solid prophetic connection is in verse 8. Within 65 years, Ephraim will cease to exist as a people. 65 years from 734 puts us down in the time of domination by the Assyrian kings of Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal. It was their foreign policy to mix up the nations of the lands that they had conquered. They carried the Israelites off and brought in a variety of peoples from all over, so that the land of Ephraim was a land peopled with all nationalities other than the Israelites. The ones who remain intermarried with them, creating a half-breed race of people known later as the Samaritans. Verse 9 gives the theological lesson at the heart of this passage. We have had the circumstances. We have had the sure word from God. We will have the sign to confirm it. Here is the instructions. Have faith in the Lord. That's what it was. Have faith in the Lord. It is worded in the negative form. If you do not stand in your faith, then you will not stand at all. Well, the basic meaning is to be reliable, to support, be confirmed, faithful, sure, or trustworthy. Have faith in the Lord. If Ahaz did not believe the sure word from God, he would not survive the invasion and be a part of God's program. The opposite can also be seen. If he would believe, he would find security and safety in the Lord. It is put in the negative because Isaiah did not expect the King Ahaz, to believe in the first place. We also have a sure word from the Lord. We have a victory that can overcome the world if we have faith. We have a security in Christ if we believe. We need not fear what mankind can do, for we trust in the eternal Lord. Well, it sounds simple, doesn't it? Have faith in the Lord. Well, the second section is God expects, verses 10 through 13. Then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz. Ask for a sign from the Lord your God. It can be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. But Ahaz replied, I will not ask. I will not test the Lord. Then Isaiah said, Listen, house of David, is it not enough for you to try the patience of men? Will you also try the patience of my God? Well, to encourage the king to believe, God offers to let him ask for a sign, and that it will happen. But the king will not even do that. So God gives a sign that tells of the future of the Davidic kingdom without the king in it. Verse 11 tells of the offer to the king for a sign. According to verse 10, Yahweh spoke to the king and gave this invitation for a sign. Well, Stephen Poracan from the Catholic Biblical Quarterly 22 surveyed all the uses of the word sign. He concluded that a sign is a symbolic saying, a fact or action. It can also be a name, wonderful or not, introducing or accompanying and illustrating or signifying the contents of a prophetic prediction. Here the king could name the sign, anything at all that he could think of, and God would do it. God didn't have to do that. He didn't even have to ask him a question or give him the option of giving him this sign. But the king, King Ahaz, refuses to put God to the test. In verse 12, it is very interesting because the king sounds very pious. But from the book of Kings, it says that he was a wicked unbeliever. He was trapped. If he asked for a sign, he would be submitting to the prophet. If he did not ask, everyone would know that he did not believe. So he said, I will not ask. I will not test the Lord. If a human tested God, it usually meant rebellion, tempting as a challenge, coming without fear, and wanting proof. Ahaz pretended piety and said he would not test God. But God would give this sign anyway, not now to Ahaz, but to the whole house of David. Well, the next section is called God Announces. This is good news. Verses 14 and 15. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. See, the virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel. By the time he learns to reject what is bad and choose what is good, he will be eating curds and honey. Well, verse 14 records the sign and a stinging rebuke that the king had wearied Yahweh with his unbelief. The sign is an unexpected birth through a young woman or virgin, in the context, in the royal court, a very polite society, and certainly as a heavenly sign of God's presence. This young woman would certainly be presumed to be a virgin. The young woman was to have a child, and that child was to be the proof of the presence of God among his people, signified by the name Emmanuel, with us, God. The sign would be proof that the royal Davidic household, and thereby the nation of Judah, would indeed survive and have a glorious future. Well, the virgin birth was God's revealed plan, and that Jesus is the Emmanuel of Isaiah. His supernatural birth is one major sign that signifies that Jesus is Emmanuel. The doctrine of the incarnation is that God came into this world and became flesh. Jesus is not a mere mortal. His words are the words of God and to be believed. At the end of his life is the other confirming sign, the resurrection. His birth is a sign of his supernatural origin. His resurrection is a sign of his supernatural nature. He is Emmanuel indeed, God with us. But if we do not believe, we will not be confirmed. Since we believed in him, we stand firm in all the difficulties of this life and are assured of his salvation in the life to come. The prediction that the child will eat butter and honey, curds and honey, in verse 15 indicates something pleasant or something bad, depending upon the context. If you are coming out of a wilderness, eating this would be a blessing. If you had been used to all the finest foods of the land, being reduced to this would not be so good. If you look at verses 21 and 22, a little later in the chapter, it's a little easier to understand. It says this: "In that day a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep. And because of the abundance of milk that they give, he will eat curds. For everyone who is left in the land will eat curds and honey." Eating curds and honey are a sign that the land would be totally devastated and nothing would be growing. So the message was that Judah would survive the northern coalition's attempts to destroy her, but the land would soon be devastated. In other words, the name Shear Jashub would be literally worked out. A remnant would return means that there would be devastation, but there would be a returning remnant. The last section is God judges. Chapter 7, verses 16 and 7. It says this: "For before the boy knows to reject what is bad and choose what is good, the land of the two kings you dread will be abandoned. The Lord will bring on you, your people, and your father's house such a time as has never been since Ephraim separated from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria." Well, Ahaz's unbelief was a critical problem. God had offered complete security if he would only believe. And he could have had a confirming sign. But he didn't believe. And so God announced the sign that the Davidic house would continue by divine intervention. This sign, coupled with faith, meant to signify and would be necessary for the greater judgment that was coming. Well, the greater judgment was coming for unbelief, and that faith in the supernatural provision of God would see his people through. The idea of faith and judgment can be seen on two levels, on two contexts, and the end of the age. Verses 17 and 18 introduce the invasion. The fly that it talks about is Egypt, and the bee is Assyria. God will whistle is anthropomorphic language, saying he will summon them. They will come and fill every place in the land according to verse 19. The armies will fill this land. The invading armies will not only destroy the land, they will humiliate the survivors. Verse 20 introduces the idea of shaving. You're going to have to read these verses now, 18, 19, and 20. The invading armies often did shave their captives and carry them off into slavery without clothing and without dignity. So you can see the humiliation that came with being in this slavery. Isaiah 6 says that the land will be left desolate. Verses 21 through 25, which you need to read, predict how life in the land will be after the invasion. Nothing will be able to grow or to be harvested. So the briars and the thorns that are left will overtake the land where the vineyards once were. People will have their animals and will rely on them for staple products. And that's how they're going to eat. Well, what is the application for us? Well, true security from all danger, even judgment, comes by faith in God's supernatural provision of Emmanuel, Jesus. We've got to trust in Jesus. We have got to give our hearts to Jesus. There is a glorious future promised by God through this Davidic covenant. That future is guaranteed and confirmed through a divinely appointed birth, a virgin birth, that is completely unexpected and that is proof of God's presence. He's never going to leave us nor forsake us. God calls people to believe His word and find security in troubling times, in this life and in the life to come. In the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son to be born of the Virgin Mary. This one is Emmanuel in the true sense of the word. His birth confirmed that his word was trustworthy. Faith in him guarantees participation in the glorious future of peace and righteousness. The application for unbelievers is certainly the warning to believe, or they will not be saved. The application for believers would be twofold: to gain confidence through this sign and that their destiny is sure, and to share the work of the prophet in calling for others to become part of the remnant of the Lord and put away fears of the circumstances of this life. Well, we can trust his promises. Have faith in the Lord. Thanks. See you next week.